Okay, we are live.
Hello to everyone out there. It's very eerie. We can't see you, but we believe that you're present among us as we talk to you about trans power on the page. I'm going to be moderating. I'm Jeanne Thornton, and I will start, I guess, by introducing all of you, and then got some questions, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to do introductions in alphabetical order by last name, starting Alvina Chamberland, who is a Swedish-US-American author of predominantly literary autofiction novels. In 2015, Bokförlaget ETC published her co-authored book, Allt som mitt, oh my god, Väldigt.
Your pronunciation. I was going to say you did very well.
Thank you.
With the first, but the longer, you can skip the titles.
Okay. The English translation is All That Is Mine, Rape, Stigmatization, and Reparation. Book received a grant from the Swedish Arts Council. In September 2018, her novel Locked Out, a nostalgic account of growing up for freaks, parody of the coming-of-age genre, is published by Dockhaveri Förlag. She resides between Athens and Berlin and has no real hobbies, only intensity and serenity. Love the World or Get Killed Trying is her English language debut. That is Alvina. Next, we have Logan-Ashley Kisner, who is the trans and queer author of Old Wounds, a bulletin of the Center for Children's Books Best Book of 2024, and The Transition. He received his BA in creative writing from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, alongside a minor in film studies, and remains in Las Vegas with his partner Alex and their two cats, Gimli and Check-It. His novels focus on seeing trans characters get the stories, the nuance, and the moments of terror and bravery they are long overdue for. Beyond his fiction work, Logan also serves as an informal transgender horror historian, and his upcoming young adult novels include Trans Panic and Docile Creatures, both in 2027. That is Logan-Ashley. Next, Nico Lang, who is an award-winning reporter and editor. They are an LGBTQ plus correspondent for Vice and a frequent contributor to NBC News and Extra. Their work has been featured in the New York Times, in Rolling Stone, in Esquire, Harper's Bazaar, Washington Post, Vox, BuzzFeed, Jezebel, The Guardian, Out, The Advocate, and the LA Times. And last but not least, Zefyr Lisowski, who is the author of the forthcoming Uncanny Valley Girls, an essay collection about horror movies, exes, and intimacy, out from Harper Perennial, I think now, right? Or imminently? Tuesday, okay. Set your calendars. Zefyr is a 2023 NYFA, NYSCA Fellow in Nonfiction and a 2023 Queer Art Fellow. She's also the author of two poetry collections, Girl Work from Noemi Press in 2024 and Blood Box from Black Lawrence in 2019. Raised in the Great Dismal Swamp, North Carolina, Zefyr lives in Brooklyn and has seen grave robbers twice. I'm very compelled and intimidated to be talking to all of you about trans power on the page. Are we ready to jump into this with some questions? Are we feeling powerful? Okay. So I wanted to start out by kind of a moment of maximum power here, starting this panel by kind of inviting you to brag on yourself and the powers that you are ushering into the world here on the Lambda Literary Award Day, which is, of course, the most powerful day queer authors have all year. So the first question I'd like to ask each of you, in what way is each of your work impossibly powerful? Whoever would like to start claiming their power first. Alvina, you must go. You must claim your power. It's happening.
All right. Maybe through admitting to a certain amount also of powerlessness, and through leaning into moments of feeling powerless and expressing that and sharing that and admitting to that and not being ashamed of that. I feel in my work that that can be sometimes its own source of power, that because I don't know if, like, I mean, power and empower are different things. Like, I wouldn't say that my work is traditionally empowering in that sense. It's more like into going into what feels very real and very deep inside of somebody, and through that there's a lot of different spectrums. Some things are maybe very empowering, some things are very powerful, some things are very powerless, some things are very weak, some things are very difficult, some things are very magnetic, some magical, some things are very depressing. And yeah, I think through, like, admitting to the full spectrum of humanity and emotional spectrum, that there's a lot of power in that. And I guess that's the closest it gets. If we connect that somehow to being trans, I guess it's the insistence upon that you can be all these things and be trans, that we're not one thing, that we're multidimensional people, obviously. I mean, I don't have to explain to anyone here that that's the case, but sometimes to the cis world, we still have to not explain that, but show that, because they don't understand that.
I hear you saying there's sort of like a power in vulnerability, a power in multiplicity. I'm wondering, would anyone else like to pick up that and also brag on your work? Talk about why you're impossibly powerful, whether it is this power, whether it is another power, just vibing off of that.
I can definitely pick up as someone who's both pressmates with Alvina and also like wrote a book sharing kind of similar concerns a little bit. Girl Work, my poetry collection, is like very sort of concerned with the abject. It's very concerned with sort of cycles of grief, cycles of reiterative violence. And because of that, it also doesn't really feel normatively powerful. But it is also about subsumption and something greater than you. It's about like moving through this grief into something on the other side. And I think that survival in the face of often inarticulatable violence, often even survival through trying to articulate that inarticulatable violence, is itself a profoundly powerful and a profoundly political act. So I kind of view the trajectory of my work not just as being like, look at the sort of political and economic and social circumstances that I or that a trans person or trans people exist under, but look at the tenacity that we hold despite and through those things, nevertheless.
I buy this. I buy this power. I believe we are tenacious. Nico, what do you think about tenacity? Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, I am. Hello. Okay, sorry about that. Zoom, isn't it great? So what I was just going to say is I think that and I'm trying I'm not trying to be humble here or something, but I think my book's power is the power of other people, because my book, American Teenager, it's all about the power of trans kids sharing stories and sharing their own stories on their own terms, and the way I wrote this book is that I spent 2.5 weeks with 7 different families all across the country. And I sort of let the families and the kids decide for themselves what their stories were. Like, I wasn't telling them like, oh, you're going to be the Southern family, you're going to be the religious family, you're going to be the Muslim family, you're going to be the privileged family, right? I would sit with them for the first couple of days when I was there and really ask them, what do you think that your story is? And how can I sort of best express that as a journalist? Because I think a lot of the time we don't really get to decide what our stories are, particularly like when you're working with a reporter, like, or you're like part of like a news article, right? The journalist isn't really sitting you down and giving you the agency to kind of like co-write your story. And I really wanted to do that for these kids because I thought it was important to give them a platform to say really whatever they want. I was in college, I was voted most confrontational and I wear that honor with pride. And I can't imagine, being like a 16-year-old kid and seeing all of these anti-trans lawmakers all across the country who are saying these things about you and just like not getting to say anything back to it. So with this book, I just wanted to give them the space to say whatever they wanted, to unburden themselves, just get whatever out their chest they needed to say whatever they need to say. And that just felt like a really lovely gift to give them. And I think we all get to sort of share in that power. That I think when trans kids are given the space to like express themselves fully and freely and just be like fully vulnerable and honest with us, I think it makes us all more vulnerable and honest. So I think, by them being powerful, it makes us all more powerful.
I love that. I love that a great deal. The power, I want to say briefly, the power to speak, by the way, for those who are watching, I love a noisy chat. Please, I've seen some reactions, seen some things. Please react to what people are saying. Please do not be afraid of talking back. As we hear our final panelist, Logan-Ashley Kisner, tell us, why is your work impossibly powerful?
Oh God, as I do not have the power to speak. I would say mine is powerful. I started writing Old Wounds during COVID, and I was in a weird transitional space. Like I had come out in transition, but I was kind of now in the now what stage. And so in tying my two main characters together, I wanted to tie my high school self where I wasn't out, and then this post-transition self. I'm like, okay, I've gone and done this thing. Now what? So what? And just writing about kids that I hadn't seen in media before. Trans kids in horror spaces are still kind of a very, very niche genre. And just stuff I'd never seen before. People I had conversations with, like, why don't we get these spaces? Why don't we see ourselves in these situations that sort of naturally present themselves to be questioned and ripped apart and seen in different aspects? And yeah, like I said, power of speech is not mine today.
I feel the power of speech was with you there. I feel very good about this power. I feel very good about all these powers. I think this is a very powerful summit. I'm going to ask also some questions, and these are kind of gleaned from themes that I saw going across everyone's work. So I'm going to ask about some specific powers that I'm seeing you use in different ways. One of those powers, Nico, you alluded to, which is the power to speak, and particularly to speak truths that jar people. So, because at its root, this is almost what transness does, right? Given that in this era of history, we're in a world that's almost completely branded with gender from the jump. It's how we sort our society from the beginning. It leads to a great deal of inequity of these things. Each of your work has a different relationship, and I think everyone's alluded to this in some ways, to speaking the truth that we're sort of, this is the truth about how I'm defining myself. So this is an inner truth that's maybe counter to the truth the world is giving in all kinds of ways. What would the relationships does each person's work have with that act of speaking the truth, engaging with the consequences when people dispute the truth or try to suppress the truth, or speaking an uncomfortable truth, perhaps?
Is it okay if I start on this one?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, the truth is really critically important right now, just as a journalist, because it's something that I feel like that is often like weaponized against trans kids, in that, something I write in the book is that I think we're seeing so much misinformation about trans youth that's based, not just in like, how do you say, fear and apprehension, but also just this misinformation that's rooted in a lack of information, that so many people are operating under bad faith because they just don't know anything about trans people. Like if you look at data from GLAAD and from other nonprofits, they generally show that about 27% of Americans know a trans person or think that they know a trans person, because the number is probably a lot higher because Tina at the checkout counter isn't being like, hey, I'm Tina, I'm trans, Well, maybe she is, and if so, slay Tina, you're doing great work. But I just feel like that's not the case for the most part. So a lot of Americans who do know someone don't realize they do. And because of that, that then leaves about 73% of Americans who don't know the trans person or don't realize that they know. And the far right has done a really good job right now of exploiting that like knowledge vacuum by filling it with just like fear and like anti-trans rhetoric and like outright lies. And I think that's something that we as storytellers have to do is fill it with good information, right? Fill it with the stories of trans kids, fill it the stories with trans adults, fill it with just like authenticity and truth and beauty. And for me, that's really what I wanted this book to be, that I thought that it was a really good way to counter misinformation by just letting these kids tell us about themselves, being able to get to know them. There's this idea that if you know a single queer or trans person, that you're more likely to vote for LGBTQ rights causes than the opposite, than if you don't. But the thing is that for the kids in the book, I don't have the ability to like take Wyatt, you know, in the first chapter, my South Dakota kid. I don't have the ability to just like take him across the country and force him to meet every single American. So I thought that this book is sort of the next best thing of being like, you get to spend time with Wyatt, you get to see what his life is like, you get to share in his hopes and his dreams and his fears. And at the end of it, you get to feel like you know him. Like you might not actually, but he feels real to you because he is real. He's a real human being. And he feels like someone you've known your entire life. It feels like he could be like your brother or your kid or your friend's kid. And I just had to hope that that makes a difference. Like when we see the state of this country right now, I have to hope that making our discourse a little more human and then putting these kids at the center of it will make things a little bit better at least.
Legit. This is very much the power to speak truth. Does anybody else want to react to that, to speak to the same power?
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay, I'll be quick. I just feel that for me in my book and in my writing in general, like I was saying a bit before, we get to have a little cat.
Yeah, she's going to scream throughout the panel because she has needs, emotional needs.
Oh, I understand. And I feel that by taking up space, like I was saying a little bit in what I said previously, this thing about taking up space with the complexity and the truth, I feel you build bridges, and that's very different from thinking that you build bridges through watering down and, compromising and, being overly pedagogical. It's actually, no, I build bridges through not compromising with the truth. So if I, in my book, I tried to, as much as possible, be honest with everything that was going on and happening to me and that I was thinking at the time, which of course is not the same as what I'm thinking today, but that's not what's most relevant, but what I was thinking at the time and feeling at the time. And through that, you build a bridge to people who may have very, very different experiences than you, but still experience the same emotions, which are very human emotions. And, with my novel, like I had a lot of straight men come up to, like a lot of people, a lot of different identities, by the way, but I'm just talking about straight cis men now because they're the ones who you would think would be so far away from, understanding my emotional experience of things. But because I was so brutally honest with things, they were like, a lot of them were relating to the main character. And not at all because of the experiences, not at all because of anything in that direction, but just because the raw humanity of the emotions. And that kind of, that's for me a bridge that unapologetic, truthful, raw, vulnerable art can build between people.
I love that. I love the idea that the truth is sort of forging a connection that's not like there's not so much power in like lying in some ways, right? Misrepresenting your reality. It's sort of, there's power in lying too, but I hear what you're saying. Does anyone else want to speak to the power of truth in their work, or sort of how you're working?
Yeah. I can jump in because I feel like sort of my relationship to that sort of piggybacks off Alvina and Nico's as well. It was really important to me when I was writing the poetry collection to not fall into a hagiography of myself or others. It was very important to not kind of view trans people as sort of blanket paragons of virtue. I think the way that's like the most one of the ways that's most impactful to counter disinformation is not to just invert the terms of the argument, right? Not to be like, they say we're bad, so therefore we are good,
Yeah.
but to hold space for the complexity of actual human emotions, human actions, to think about the ways in which harm can reproduce itself without even being intentional, and using those things to sort of paint a more complex human portrayal of ourselves. I think that for me, the relationship with a lot of the book is written in second person address. And the book sort of starts with a you that points towards the audience kind of accusatorily. It's a you who's like an abuser, a you who's like someone who has like done the speaker wrong. And by the end of the book, the you has changed to being pointing a finger at the mirror, looking at yourself. And I think that shift, moving from like the second person as this site of externalized harm to the second person as a site of kind of expanding the self, as thinking about more complex interactions while still holding space for grace and love and care and all of these things that are important to survive, was really key to how I thought about the arc of truth in the book and how I thought about the representation of ourselves in general.
I love that. I love the journey from the you point, the accusing you out, to the you pointing back here. I'm here for a second person anyway, generally, so I love all of this. Logan-Ashley, do you want to speak to this before?
Yeah, I love what Zefyr said about like the complexities of trans people and just all of that. When I was writing my second main character, Max, I had a lot of notes, both from my professional editors and just like people in my life, of he's far too unlikable. Like, I hate this. Like, no, just the concept of him was no. And I'm like, he was a lot, like he came from my own experience of being closeted and just being really, really angry about it. And I'm like, I want to convey that, like, not, I'm used to reading or seeing a very specific kind of trans person in the media that gets mainstream. And it's not really until you dig for more nuanced representation that you find what's fallen through the cracks. And I wanted something that represented like 18-year-old me, who was very angry at everything. And that anger was lashing out at people who didn't deserve it in situations that shouldn't have happened, but did because I was angry and needed an outlet for something. And just in my book, the characters like fighting over what their version of the truth is with their relationship and their dynamic, their belief of what the other is living and what the other has gone through versus, I guess, the truth in the middle. Yeah. And then within the book, I make reference to a lot of other older movies and films and just situations that happened. I guess like a past version of the truth that is still true, but no longer understood in those same terms, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. I will say that I really enjoy the trans representation in your book. I enjoy that it's like messy trans exes in a car together. It feels, I am here for this problem kid that you're writing about. You have given me two wonderful segues to other questions, and I have to decide which I want to take. I think I want to take what you just said about influences in older stories, because I think that is one of the trans powers, right? Is the power to claim other stories, to place pieces of culture that maybe didn't intentionally reckon with gender, which again, we're saying is sort of foundational to transness, is that we reject the sort of idea that gender is binding, innate, and the best way to organize our entire society. So it's something that does cut through all of culture, and we have this sort of unique power in our stories to take media that doesn't necessarily know that it's taking gender in general, and then the possibility of cross-gender representation, the possibility of transness in thinking about it, and suddenly bringing that to the center. And I think that's why our work has lots of intertextuality with other writers and forms, why we're good at pop culture, why we're good at reference, why we're good at working with influence and all of these transformations. I know that all of your work use this power. I'm wondering if each of you could speak to how does your work reference pop culture, older forms, intertextuality, whether that's in the form of the book itself or in terms of the lives of the people you're writing about. How does that culture flow into their world?
I can take this one first. So in coming up with the story of Old Wounds, it came a lot from texts that pointedly weren't trans, and I took issue with that. Just horror specifically, where the gender of the characters were impacting on the horror. My favorite example is the 2019 Black Christmas reboot, where they toss the slasher and they go for this supernatural bent of all men are susceptible to this possessive evil force. And the characters within the text will allude to transness and to gender nonconformity, but within the actual text itself, it's just cis men and women fighting the same men brutalizing women storyline that we've seen a lot with no variation. And so I wanted to make something where okay, I want both of my main characters to be trans. I want the story to have no out point for them to ignore this issue, and I want it to get hashed out. And then in my original draft, I had a throwaway reference to Boys Don't Cry. And during one of the revisions, I think it was my agent who was let's expand upon this a little bit. And so that now there's 2 chapters dedicated to just that movie and the way that it impacts specifically trans men, even to this day. Just the language that film communicates visually and textually, just the concept of trans people being a liar, and just how even in a sympathetic portrayal, it's still negative and reinforcing shit that isn't true. And I've gotten feedback that apparently that is an archaic reference that the kids today do not get, which makes me feel very old. But even then, I still think it's important to reference older texts, because even if kids don't know it, I hope that kids seek it out and can engage with it. Maybe not outright hating or not outright loving it, but understanding okay, this is where we've come from. This is a point on this map. And how does this impact where I go forward from here with understanding of both myself and others?
Totally makes sense. Speaking of horror movies, I know some people on this panel maybe have some thoughts on this topic. If anybody wants to pick this one up.
That's such an adroit segue. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about scary movies. One of the spark plugs in the engine of girl work is the 2002 movie The Ring. And this has kind of been a preoccupation of mine for a couple of reasons. For one, I saw it when I was young, probably 8 or so, like a lot of people in my generation. And it really scared me. It's a really sort of uniquely frightening film, especially if you watch it as a child. And I think part of the reason it's frightening is that's a movie that's actually pro-child murder in a way that's really menacing, right? It has this girl, this girl who's disabled and kind of queer coded, and she's sort of portrayed as this outsider to the small island rural community that she lives on. And then at the end we find out that she's evil, and they were right to have killed her, and they should have trapped her in the well more effectively, which is a really chilling message to send. But also I was kind of going down a research hole about this. I saw the American movie, and then I saw the Japanese movie where she's aged up. She's not a girl, but she's a late teenager, early 20s-year-old woman. And then that got me thinking about this chain of adaptation. And the Japanese version of The Ring is based on a novel by Koji Suzuki. And in the novel, she's even older. She's in her mid-20s. And she's also intersex. And she's intersex in a way that's specifically coded as using these transphobic tropes, right? She's actually killed in an act of transphobic violence. She's about to hook up with a man. She takes her dress off. He sees her masculinized genitals, and he throws her down a well. So that really got me thinking about what are the ways in which trans-misogynistic violence and sort of anti-trans violence in general gets sanitized, gets covered up, and gets layered underneath this, not unlike a child underneath the waters of a sort of submerged aqueous structure. And as I was thinking about that, it became a way to think about the everyday horrors that aren't quite as spectacular, but still are covered up and enabled by society.
Yeah, I vibe with that a lot. I'm just upset thinking about the ring now a little bit also. Just in general.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mission to like ruin the ring. I realize I've like done it in 2 books now. I love that movie. I have a ring tattoo, but I keep at it.
Real. I'm curious about other, because I think the question of everyday horror is certainly one that runs through these books, and also just the way of using other writing to get at transness in some ways. Like I know Alvina in particular, your work is very, very intertextual, where I believe you get a letter from Diamanda Galas at one point in Love the World or Get Killed Trying, which does my heart really good. And there's also a great deal of talking about your relationship with writers like Violette Leduc and some others. I'm wondering if you could speak to intertextuality as this how you're using this trans power.
Well, yes. I mean, I'm kind of in constant dialogue with because the book is written from from a point of a lot of solitude, purposefully so, I would say. And in that comes this instead of then, dialoguing maybe with people around, the dialogue takes place with different people who have inspired the protagonist. So like Clarice Lispector, the Brazilian author, Violette Leduc, the French author, Vasyl Mrezinski is also one, the Russian ballet dancer. Diamanda Galas is no, that was actually a real life one though. That's we've actually had email interactions, and for those who don't know, the book is a work of autofiction, so it is like my own experiences, but then sometimes, embellished, or dreams become reality, and so on and so forth, there's a freedom for that in autofiction, but it's taken from my perspective. So this dialogue actually happened and wasn't imagined. But what I find interesting about that is also it's a way of being poetic and dreamy and sometimes theoretical at the same time through this. I mean, if we look at academic work and auto theory, it's that's kind of the definition of it, that it's, in dialogue with its sources. Well, I'm also in dialogue with my sources, but they're not, building up a grand theory of anything. It's kind of just like maybe a grand theory of life, of the meaning of life, the meaning of existence, whatever the fuck that is. Trying to figure it out, trying to dig deeper into it, and they're kind of my comrades in that struggle, so to speak. Sylvia Plath also. I don't have to name all of them, but maybe like that's kind of Amy Winehouse, of course, always there. And for me, that's something that is with me all the time. And if we're going to go into like truth of being, then it's truthful for me to be honest with that also in my work.
I fully relate. I think we should always be going into the truth of being in these ways. And I think this makes sense. I love the idea of that. I love what you said about being in dialogue with your sources in this like very literal way, in this way of thinking about like foregrounding that reckoning with these other texts, and that being part of the autotheoretical method that you're using. I think I'm curious about this. And Nico, I want to ask you the same question, but it's sort of a different thing in your case, because you're working with, as you've talked about, allowing these families in this other world, these trans teenagers that you're writing about, to speak for themselves in some ways. I'm curious about how that has shown up in your interactions with these subjects and how you were writing that. Like, how did they maybe frame narratives through other texts, through other touchstones? How did that trans power kind of come through in that, and how did you channel that into the work? I think you're muted again.
Sorry, I'm at this loud conference, and there keeps being people like stomping in the hall. So I'm just trying to save you all from the noise and the ruckus here. But that's a really great question, and I think I would say that I wanted the book to feel really not just like visually and like physically immersive, where it's almost like you're like have a VR headset on and you're just like in the space with these kids, like in their room with them, like listening to music. I wanted it to feel really emotionally immersive as well. So I thought a lot about the experience of when I was a teenager and what that was like. And I know that we live in a time where these kids have to be really political all the time. Like they're doing so much political activism, and they're like literally putting their bodies and themselves on the front lines all the time. But like when I was 16, I guess I was reasonably political, but I feel like what I cared about in terms of what I was reading, like the movies I was watching, like the art that I was consuming, that was really my politics. Like those are the things that really were my world. So I felt like if you wanted to understand the inner life of these kids, you really needed to understand like what they were listening to, what they were reading, like what they were watching, and why those things sort of spoke to them. Like we devote a really big chunk of the second to last chapter to the subjects. Their two trans siblings in Florida, to their obsession with horror movies and how it speaks to their experience of being trans teens in Florida. And then, I think in these instances, in these moments where we see outside media kind of come into the fold, I always use it in like a metatextual way. It was always a way of explaining something through metaphor that I didn't think that we could get at another way. Like, I think for me, the prime example is that when I was in California, I hung out there for 2.5 weeks with Kylie, who's a Japanese Hawaiian girl, and her family. And it turns out that Kylie goes to the Buffy the Vampire Slayer high school in Torrance, and she hadn't seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And as much as like as a journalist, I'm not supposed to like influence my subjects. It's supposed to be this idea that like if you see a baby elephant trapped in the mud, you like don't like influence the baby elephant, you just like record. But I was like, I'm sorry, this baby elephant is watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't care. Like, this is education. This is cultural education. You must do this. And she was super into it. So every day we ended up watching Buffy together. And a lot of our conversations end up being framed around that. And we ended up in kind of this like philosophical debate over like whether Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a good allegory for her life. And we sort of decided in a way that it wasn't. Because, it's a show that I actually really deeply relate to. I'm watching the 4th season over again right now. And it's kind of about a girl who has a tough time with her job, and that she is given this destiny that she finds emotionally and spiritually difficult, and about the ways in which that weighs on her. For Kylie, it's kind of different in that like the sort of calling of like taking up trans activism or needing to be on the front line the way that a lot of her friends are. She doesn't really like identify with that. She's sort of decided not to be the Slayer, right? That she doesn't want to do this and she wants to be her own person. And we had a lot of really interesting debates about that. And I sort of tried not to take any position on it. Like, as I said before, I was letting these kids represent their own lives. And I was trying to sort of find the nuance in that. I really related to what Zefyr said earlier, actually, about this idea of inversion, that the way to invert the idea of trans people being bad isn't to say they're good and virtuous and they always make the best decision at every moment in life, but to just show folks who they are in all of their like myriad complications. And I thought that the media that we interweave into the text here does a really good job of just making them fully fleshed out, well-rounded human beings. Like, I love that they get to be in this book kids with just mundane interests, just like everyone else. Like that anti-trans legislation is just as important for Wyatt as like how much he loves Sufjan Stevens, and the fact that we sort of put both of those on like an even playing field. I feel like sometimes with trans kids, we treat them as if the only thing they have going on is just like all of these bills and laws that are being introduced to erase and extinguish them, but they have entire lives that are outside of this that they never get to talk about. Like, I just, at one point in my life, my career goal is to just ask a trans kid what they thought of one battle after another. Like, did you see it? Did you like it? What did you think of it? Because it just feels like the kind of stuff, that like basic humanity that trans people get denied all the time. And that's really what this book is rooted in.
I love that. I love the idea of, I think of books, if your book's specifically doing that, or just the the kindness of taking the time to do that, to ask kids about, like, it's not a political project in some ways, or it is in a deep way where it's sort of like, what shows do you like? What do you care about? What is that basic humanity level that you're talking about? I think that's sort of what books generally are really good at. It's something that I've really enjoyed in all of y'all's work, is sort of these moments of just like moments of hanging around, moments of sort of the moments between urgency, the moments of this. I think that's kind of what literature is for in general, is filling in this space. I think I want to ask you about, because I'm compelled by something that you said this teenager told you. It's also one of the trans powers that I think we have, which is the power of departure and refusal. You said this teenager was sort of like, there's a destiny that's called for me to be a fighter for trans rights and activism, and I simply refuse that destiny. I simply want to be human more than I want that. I think that the power to depart and the power to refuse is actually deeply in a lot of these works as well. Again, taking lots of different forms. There's family disconnection. There's literally running away in a van to find a new life. There's refusals to forgive in some cases, or refusals not to reckon with the past. I think also, Alvina, this is something we talked about in email before, but the idea of refusing a linear narrative, of refusing a kind of easy form in some key ways, I think is really compelling. I'm wondering if each of you could speak to how your work is using or reflecting at least that trans power of refusal, of departure, of drawing a line and saying no.
Yeah, I can.
No,
Yeah.
this time it's you first.
Again,
Because last time when we did the same time, it was me. So this time you.
yeah, of course. Yeah, there are a lot of kind of refusals throughout girl work. Um, it sort of has an accusatory. The book opens with an accusatory refrain. Do you remember what you did? And I think through that, that's refusing the refusal, right? Refusing the you who is not me to absolve themselves, which ties into against forgiveness as well, which is a poem that is very much sort of against this um, sort of like blanketly Christo supremacist idea that like you have to forgive, you have to move forward with like grace and forgiveness, and that's the way towards like community healing. It asks, what if there are actions that are unforgivable? And Against Forgiveness is a poem that points both at an abuser and also at sort of myself, thinking about like patterns of complicity as well. I think that for me, refusal is something that is really important in complexifying the narratives that we tell ourselves and the narratives that we allow to be told about ourselves as well. I think the act of refusing, whether that be refusing the interpersonal, refusing just by saying no to something, or more sort of salient and like politically important processes of refusal that are happening right now, right? The United States is like funding and abetting genocide in Palestine. And I think that there are so many acts of refusal that go into not letting the war machine continue unabated, that are intimately tied to the expressions of self and expressions of bodily autonomy that we all necessarily need to engage in and refuse the suppression of as trans people as well.
Very much agree. Who else has thoughts on refusal and drawing a line? Alvina, what's up?
It seems, do you hear me?
Yes.
Everyone? It seems like for me, hearing the audio is going up and down. Like sometimes I hear it, sometimes I don't. But okay, I'll speak and hopefully it continues to work. For me, it's a lot about this thing with linearity that like, and that comes back again to truth, you know, of what a life, the complexity that a life can actually contain, which is, you know, not a linear narrative. And I think maybe that's even more clear in a trans person's life. We have, you know, we have the traditional life trajectory. Our lives usually don't follow that for many, many different reasons. And one of them is, of course, transitioning. And I, even before transitioning, didn't feel that my life followed a linear narrative, but even less so now. And I just think about like the works that have inspired me, that have come the closest to kind of the messiness and the magic of life, are the ones that refuse the linear narrative, the ones that, you know, are instead looking to investigate how things really felt inside, how it burned on your skin, how that one moment captured so much about existence, rather than, you know, trying to fit it all into a storyline with a traditional dramatic arc that is not the way that life functions. And thus, for me at least, with the literature that I'm interested in and the literature that I want to create, also won't function. Like in my next work, I have it all, like almost everything is it's aphorisms, and they're all organized alphabetically, because I'm like, you know, what kind of form is this supposed to have? Am I supposed to do it by subject? Am I supposed to do it by time? No, just let it kind of have its flow that is haphazard and therefore also real, as I think Boris Pasternak once said.
I love that quote. I love the idea of organizing it alphabetically as well. That is special. What are we thinking about departure in some ways? Like in terms of departure, in terms of like rejecting the narrative laid out for you? Like Logan-Ashley, I'm sort of thinking about your book here, where it's like your character is sort of very directly having a narrative imposed on him that he rejects by physically, in quite a harrowing escape sequence, physically leaving.
Yeah, in Old Wounds, the rejection is very literal, as they are literally rejecting where they are to go somewhere else. And then with Max, that ties kind of back into Boys Don't Cry. At least in my life, that film also was how people knew trans men around me. So when I came out, that false image of you are doomed to this awful life and death was in their heads. And so in Max's reality, it's sort of the same situation where that is his world's only exposure to trans people like him. And so at a certain point in the book, he sort of rejects that outright and says, basically, like, we are not destined for this. We are not like, this is not a prerequisite of my life. Like, this simply happened and is not required to happen to me. And so that was important for me, because I feel like the message that films like Boys Don't Cry and stuff like that communicate about trans people aren't healthy, where it sort of implies this predisposition for violence that isn't there, or at least shouldn't be there, depending on how you view people's actions and such. Yeah, his rejection is very heavily in that. And then just with the literal journey across the country, light spoilers, but a character at the end decides to go back to Ohio. And when I chose Ohio, I was not like actively looking for like, what's the worst state of the 50 that I can choose? And well, leading up to the book's publication, like Ohio actively got a lot worse for trans youth. And that was really weird for me to kind of try and reckon with, both with the book itself and with the ending, where this character decides that they value their home enough to fight for it and they have the opportunity to fight for it, whereas the other one really doesn't and can't. And so I guess, yeah, rejection happens across the book and just in various ways, and it's different for everybody. It's different depending on what you want and what you know you can handle and doing by yourself.
I just want to say, my dear friend Casey Platt lives in Ohio. That's the only good fact I can think of about Ohio. It is a good candidate for a bad state. Nico, anything you want to say about this and departures?
Sure. I'm going to reject these narratives about Ohio. I grew up in Cincinnati and I love Ohio. I was at an old job banned from talking about Cincinnati because everyone said I talked about it too much. All I'm saying is like, go to Cincinnati, have some Grater's ice cream, specifically the raspberry chocolate chip, and some Skyline chili, particularly the 5-way, because if you're going to do it, you got to go all the way. Then get back to me about how great Ohio is. Just saying.
What is 5-way chili? We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, we don't have time for this. Google it; it'll change your life.
Okay.
Anyhow, I think for me, this entire book was a departure. It was a rejection of like narrative tropes. It was sort of a rejection, I think, of what even like publishers wanted this book to be. I think I wrote in the acknowledgments in the end that we got a lot of really interesting feedback when we were shopping this book around to different publishers. We were turned down by just about everyone. And that's not because they thought the book wasn't good, because it is good. The writing slaps. It's that first, they didn't think it would sell. They didn't think there was a market for this or anybody would like buy it. So they just didn't know how to put it out into the world. And then on top of that, one publisher that I won't say the name of, Macmillan, told us that the book wasn't realistic because none of the families rejected their kids. And it's a really good thing I was not in, because, you know, your agents handle those sorts of things. It's a really good thing I was not in that meeting because I would have flipped a table. Just because it's like, yeah, I think that rejection trauma is a part of the trans experience, just like it's a part of everybody's experience. It's a part of the cis experience. It's a part of the experience of everyone in this world. But to insist that that had to be the center of this, I just found really offensive, because for me, as I said before, I sort of let the kids decide what the story would be. If that was a sad story, you know, a story that felt most important to tell, we told that story. But I was really using whatever lens they gave me. And then on top of that, the stories that I looked for in this book and that I felt most compelled toward were stories that I hadn't heard before. And I just, you know, like, I've heard that story in the queer context a lot. When I was in high school, the major queer book at the time from a nonfiction lens was called Prayers for Bobby. It sounds like I'm throwing shade against this book, but it is quite well done. It's all about a woman whose son takes his own life and how she becomes a sort of like dedicated, like PFLAG activist afterward. Like, she had been like hateful and non-affirming before, but after losing him, she sort of has this sort of come to Jesus moment and does all this like incredible activism. And, you know, that's great. I'm glad that, you know, that she did that. But it's also like, why does death have to be like the medium by which we tell this story? Like, why does that have to be the baseline? I wanted a different baseline here. I wanted to hear something that I hadn't heard before. Like, we have stories in this book of kids who do struggle with their families, who have families that like love them and support them, but don't always get it and aren't perfect, are messy, to use a word that we've used several times already. And I felt like talking about that was more important to me, creating space for something that I feel like so many people in my life do deal with, like parents that don't always get it right? Or like family members that are trying, but just like have all these hangups. That felt really critical to me because I just hadn't seen that much space for that. So for this book, it was me expanding the narrative in any kind of way I could, expanding the canon in any kind of way I could. And even ways that I think I didn't necessarily intend. Like, I love that in this book, we get a family of a trans kid, Clint, in Illinois. His family is Muslim and he's of Pakistani descent. And I like that in their family, because his parents are super progressive, they have so much conflict, but it's not about him being trans. Like, his mom, Maha, is a super free-spirited, independent, progressive Muslim woman who thinks that she should be able to get to be a woman and a Muslim on her own terms. And her parents do not like get that, and they do not agree or understand. When it came to Clint, they were able to get over that one pretty quickly. But when it comes to her, that, you know, they've been fighting about it for the past 50 years. So I love the idea that even there is a family that has a lot of conflict, that has a lot of trauma, that has things that they still like grieve over, but it has nothing to do with their like kid being trans. And I just felt like that story to me was just something that felt so much more valuable to tell than these sort of reaffirmations of what we've been talking about, of just hearing nothing but that trauma story over and over and over again. Because it's like, I think as Logan points out, then it's the only thing that you believe is possible. When that's the only thing you see, you don't have any other possibility around it. So I want kids to have more than that. They deserve more than that.
No, totally. We all deserve more. I feel like we all deserve to be subplots in like a greater drama that's moving elsewhere, and just have the piece of this. I actually love the idea of having this kind of piece. Yeah, we are running up against time. I wanted to shout out. This is a very abstract panel because we don't know like who's here in some ways, except for Vanessa Clark, who I want to shout out. Thank you so much for being designated audience reactor. Yay. I was going to try to make some time for questions in the chat, but I don't think we have it. Instead, I want to ask everyone quickly in like maybe a sentence. One last thing on power. We use power. We've talked about all the powers that trans people have. We talked about all the powers trans people on the page have. But power is for using. Power is for shaping. What's like one sentence long thing that you want to use your power to make? Like one thing that you want to put into the world with your powers. I want to build a 5-way chili. That's mine. But what's yours?
I feel called out, so I'll go. I just want to give other people platform to tell their story. So I feel like as a person, I've gotten the chance to tell mine. Now I want to let other people tell theirs.
I feel very similarly, actually. I realize that the logic of the publishing industry very much operates under the like kind of logics of the token, right? Which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited by this panel, by a lot of the work that Lambda does. But I want to use my powers to refuse the impetus, both socially and professionally, to remain siloed in a unit unto myself and bring as many other trans people and especially trans women up with me as I can.
For me, I'd say to just continue writing, especially from the fact that I definitely don't live 100% of my life stealth, but like maybe 70% or something like this in my daily life. Writing becomes this very important outlet to get to think about these things, to get them out of my system, to put them out there in the world, to have a place where I'm completely unapologetically myself with my history. And yeah, that's like, I mean, I want to use, that's what I'm good at, you know? I'm good at writing. I'm shit at a lot of other things, but I'm good at writing.
Co-sign that. Logan.
Other things.
Logan, what would you use your power for real quick before we lose the room?
First of all, co-signed on the shit at everything else. I've gotten a lot of messages from like middle and high school kids who say that they read my book and they felt like I had taken stuff in their brain and poured it out onto the page. And it was the first time they had like seen themselves. And that is why I write. And that is what I hope I continue to be able to do, is to give kids that initial block from which they can define themselves from there and have the language to talk about themselves in a way that's healthier than maybe what currently exists.
These are beautiful visions. These are beautiful powers. We are crackling with energy here today at Lambda. I know the finalist readings are start, so I don't want to keep it. Thank you to everybody. I think it was lovely to get to talk to you. Thanks for everybody who was in the chat. Let's go hear some cool readings, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you for being a great moderator.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
All right. I'll see you.
Y'all too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.